Daniel sat on the edge of his couch, staring at his phone, feeling a strange weight he couldn't explain. He had just finished a late breakfast of toast and coffee, trying to enjoy the quiet Sunday morning in his small apartment in Ohio. But the calm didn't last long. His phone buzzed for the second time in 10 minutes, and both calls were from family, the first from Aunt Linda, his mother's older sister, and the second from Aunt Susan, his father's younger sister. The coincidence made him uneasy. He felt a shiver down his spine. He knew this wasn't ordinary family chatter. Something serious was about to happen. Linda's voice over the phone was soft but urgent. It carried a tension Daniel hadn't heard before. She said she needed to see him alone. She couldn't talk over the phone. It was important. She sounded almost desperate. Daniel tried to ask why, but she interrupted gently, saying it was better in person. Daniel agreed, though his mind raced, wondering what could be so urgent that his usually calm, composed aunt sounded shaken. Before he could process Linda's request, his phone buzzed again. It was Susan. She said almost the same thing. She needed to meet him in person, alone. She couldn't explain over the phone. Daniel felt a growing pit in his stomach. Two aunts, both asking to meet him separately on the same day, both sounding scared, both hiding something. It made his chest tighten. He spent the next hour pacing in his apartment, debating which meeting to take first. He decided to see Linda first. She had always been a quiet, wise presence in the family, someone who carried herself with strength and composure. But there was an edge of fear in her voice today, something he couldn't ignore. He drove slowly to the small cafe she had chosen. The streets were quiet, the late morning sun soft and warm, but Daniel felt cold inside. The unease was growing. What could possibly be so wrong that his aunts, usually cheerful and composed, needed his attention in this way? When he arrived, Linda was already there, sitting in a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. She looked older than her years, not in appearance but in weariness. Daniel noticed her usual confidence was replaced by vulnerability. She greeted him with a small, tight smile, and motioned for him to sit. He did, and the weight of the silence pressed down on both of them. He could feel the unspoken tension, the words hovering, waiting to be released. Linda took a deep breath, her eyes flicking toward the window, then back to him. She said she had something to confess, something she had hidden for years. Daniel felt his heart rate quicken. He had no idea what to expect. She looked fragile, but there was determination in her voice. She explained that her marriage had been empty for a long time. Her husband had grown distant, more like a roommate than a partner. She spoke slowly, each word deliberate, as if she were carefully placing each one in his hands. She said she had felt invisible, ignored, lonely in a way that made her question her choices. Daniel listened, trying to keep calm, his mind racing through memories of family dinners, holiday gatherings, the smiles that now seemed like masks. Linda's voice trembled, but she continued. She admitted that in her loneliness, she had made decisions that caused her guilt, emotional connections that crossed lines she shouldn't have. Daniel felt a sharp pang in his chest, not judgment, but empathy. He realized that this wasn't about betrayal alone. It was about a human need for connection, for being seen, for being loved. She said the guilt was overwhelming, and she didn't want to hide it anymore. She didn't want to hurt her family. She needed someone she could trust. She needed guidance. She needed Daniel. He reached out, instinctively, and held her hand. The gesture was not romantic, but protective, comforting, a silent way to say he was there, that he understood. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer solutions yet. He simply listened, feeling the weight of her vulnerability. Linda's tears fell quietly, and Daniel felt a mixture of sorrow and responsibility. He realized then that life could be cruel, and even the strongest people could carry hidden storms. He didn't know how to help, but he knew running away wasn't an option. After the cafe, Daniel drove home, his mind still spinning, trying to process what he had just heard. Barely had he stepped inside when another message popped up from Susan, asking if he could meet that evening at the park near the river. Daniel's chest tightened. He wondered how two people, from the same family, could be carrying such similar pain. He knew Susan was not like Linda, more spirited, lighter in tone, often the one making jokes at family dinners, but her voice on the phone hinted at the same desperate need for help. By the time he reached the park, the sky had begun to turn a soft orange, the kind of evening that should feel peaceful, but Daniel felt tension in every step. Susan was waiting near the benches, her posture stiff, her hands gripping the straps of her bag. She looked at him with a mix of fear and relief. Daniel greeted her. They exchanged small talk, but it was meaningless, both knowing the real conversation had not started yet. Susan finally spoke, her voice quiet, hesitant, revealing cracks of fear and sadness Daniel had never seen before. She began by describing her marriage, how it had lost warmth over the years, how her husband had become distant, how she felt unseen, ignored, lonely. Daniel listened carefully, nodding, letting her speak without interruption. Then she admitted she had formed a connection with someone who made her feel alive again, someone who listened, someone who noticed her. It wasn't planned, it just happened, and now she was trapped in a web of guilt and longing. She didn't know how to fix it. She didn't want to hurt her family, but she needed to talk to someone who could understand without judging, someone who could guide her. Daniel felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He realized both aunts were asking him to carry their emotional burdens, to be the safe place for secrets that could shake the family. He felt conflicted, torn, unsure of what was right, what to say, how to act. He could not solve their marriages, he could not undo their choices, but he could listen, he could support, he could help them face their truths. Susan's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and Daniel felt a deep empathy. He wanted to reach out, to comfort, to say everything would be okay, even if it wasn't. The evening air grew cooler, the river reflecting shades of gold and red. Daniel and Susan sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the heaviness between them. The confessions had been made, and yet nothing had been resolved. He realized then that life sometimes thrusts impossible decisions upon us, sometimes makes us bear witness to pain we cannot fix, but that does not mean we abandon it. He promised himself he would find a way to help, not by covering up, not by judging, but by being present, being honest, being the steady hand in the storm. Daniel walked home slowly that night, his mind replaying every word, every tear, every pause. He felt exhausted but alert, like someone who had glimpsed the fragile truth behind a carefully painted wall. He thought about family gatherings, the smiles that now seemed fragile, the stories he didn't know, the quiet heartbreak that had been living beside him unnoticed. He knew things would never be the same, that the next steps he took could change relationships forever. At home, he sat by the window, looking out at the streetlights, thinking about both aunts, both carrying secrets, both asking him to help them navigate the consequences of their hearts. He realized this was more than family drama. It was a lesson in love, in human fragility, in the complexity of desire and guilt. He wondered how many people lived like this, hiding the truth, pretending all was well, while quietly their hearts broke. He felt a mixture of sorrow and determination. He would not let these stories be buried. He would not allow their pain to fester in silence. He knew the days ahead would be difficult, that conversations with both aunts would continue, that boundaries would be tested, that hearts would be fragile, but he also knew that by listening, by being present, he could help them find a way forward. A way to face their choices, to find peace with themselves, even if it was messy, even if it hurt. Daniel understood that love was not simple, that family was not perfect, that truth was never easy, and yet it was the only path toward healing. As he closed the window and turned off the lights, he felt a quiet resolve. He would face whatever came next with honesty and care. He would be the anchor in a storm of emotions. He would help both aunts navigate the shadows of their hearts, and maybe, in doing so, he would understand his own heart a little better too. Daniel woke up the next morning with the weight of the previous day pressing on his chest. He remembered every word Linda had said, every tremor in her voice, and every tear that had fallen, but even before he could fully process it, his thoughts turned to Susan, who had spoken to him late in the evening near the river. He knew that today he had to face both of them again, not because they demanded it, but because they both needed guidance. They both needed someone to help them untangle the mess of emotions they were trapped in. He decided to see Linda first, arranging to meet her at a quiet park near her home. The morning air was crisp, the kind that makes you aware of every sound, every movement. Daniel saw her sitting on a bench beneath a large oak tree, her posture stiff, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She looked at him as he approached, and for a moment, she seemed almost frozen, as if unsure whether she had the strength to speak again. Daniel sat beside her, keeping his distance respectful, but close enough to offer comfort. He didn't speak, letting her gather her courage. The silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable. It felt necessary. Linda finally began to speak, her voice low, steadying itself with effort. She explained that her marriage had been eroding for years, small cracks at first, ignored, overlooked, then widening into a chasm that she could no longer ignore. She said her husband was not cruel, not intentionally, but he had grown cold, distant, indifferent to her needs. She felt invisible in her own home, a ghost wandering through a life that was supposed to feel safe and warm. Daniel listened intently, nodding occasionally, offering quiet acknowledgement, letting her know she was being heard, which she desperately needed. She paused, taking a long sip of her tea, and then, as if the words had been waiting to escape for years, she confessed the emotional connection she had formed with someone else. It wasn't an affair in the dramatic sense, she explained. It was subtle, quiet, a bond that had developed through small gestures, late-night conversations, the kind of attention she had longed for in her marriage. She admitted that guilt had eaten at her daily, that shame had kept her awake at night, and that she didn't know how to fix it. She didn't want to destroy her family, but she couldn't continue hiding it either. Daniel felt a mixture of shock and empathy. He did not judge, he only absorbed her story, understanding that this was not about betrayal alone. It was about a human need to be seen, to be valued, to be loved. He reached out and placed his hand over hers, not in a romantic way, but as a gesture of support, of reassurance, of grounding. Linda's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she let out a shaky breath, saying that just speaking to someone who understood made the weight feel lighter. She said she wanted to make things right, even if it meant difficult conversations, even if it meant facing consequences, but she needed guidance on how to begin. Daniel didn't have all the answers, but he knew honesty was the first step. He encouraged her to confront the truth in a compassionate way, to speak openly with her husband, to seek counseling, to not bury the emotions that had been festering for years. He reminded her that hiding pain only made it grow, that facing it was the first step toward healing. Linda nodded, a small glimmer of hope appearing amidst the tears. she said she had never imagined Daniel would understand, let alone listen. Without anger or judgment, and in that moment, a bond of trust strengthened between them. Later that afternoon, Daniel met Susan at a small cafe by the river. The sun was lower in the sky, painting everything in warm gold. Susan greeted him with a hesitant smile, her usual energy subdued, her hands gripping her coffee cup tightly. Daniel could see the weight she carried, mirrored in the tension in her shoulders, the sadness in her eyes. He asked her gently how she had been coping, and Susan sighed, saying she hadn't been coping at all, that every day felt heavier than the last, that she felt trapped between loyalty, guilt, and a desperate need to feel alive again. Susan began to speak about her marriage, how it had gradually lost warmth, the small gestures of affection replaced by silence, the late nights spent together yet feeling miles apart. She described the emptiness she felt, the loneliness that crept in despite living with someone she had once loved deeply, and Daniel listened, noting the similarity to Linda's story, yet knowing each woman's pain was unique. Susan's voice wavered as she admitted she had found solace in someone who truly listened, who made her feel seen, appreciated, and alive, a person who made her laugh, who understood her in a way her husband no longer could. She explained that this connection wasn't planned. It wasn't about replacing her husband, it was about reclaiming a part of herself she had lost. But now she was caught in guilt and fear, afraid of judgment, afraid of hurting those she loved, and afraid of making mistakes she couldn't undo. Daniel felt the weight of her confession, the responsibility she had placed on him without asking directly. He understood that she needed someone to help her navigate her feelings without shame, someone to remind her that human emotions are messy, unpredictable, and sometimes painful. Daniel spoke softly, telling Susan that her feelings were valid, that seeking connection does not make someone bad, that mistakes are part of being human, and that the important thing was how she moved forward, how she addressed her own heart and the hearts of those around her. He encouraged her to find a way to communicate her needs honestly, to seek professional guidance if necessary, and to face her own emotions with courage. Susan listened, tears streaming quietly, a mixture of relief and fear written across her face. She said that no one had ever spoken to her this way, no one had offered understanding without judgment, and it gave her a sense of strength she hadn't felt in years. As they sat by the window, watching the sun dip toward the horizon, Daniel realized that both aunts were trapped not by malice, but by loneliness, by unmet needs, by the fear of breaking the lives they had built. He understood that life was rarely black and white, that love could be complicated, that family could be fragile, and that the act of listening, of being present, was sometimes the most powerful way to help someone heal. Susan reached across the table, touching his hand briefly, a silent acknowledgement of gratitude, of trust, of recognition that he was the steady presence in a storm of emotion. The days following these meetings were a blur for Daniel. He found himself balancing conversations with both aunts, navigating delicate emotions, helping them see clarity amidst confusion. He encouraged Linda to have an open conversation with her husband, to seek counseling, to confront the truth of her feelings, and he did the same with Susan, guiding her to face her own emotions without running, without shame, without fear. He became a quiet anchor in a turbulent sea, holding space for their confessions, supporting their choices to confront pain, yet never overstepping. He realized that he was witnessing more than personal confessions. He was witnessing the raw reality of human vulnerability, the fragility of relationships, the hidden struggles that exist behind smiles and laughter. He thought about the dinners, the holidays, The small interactions that once seemed ordinary, now imbued with new understanding. He saw how loneliness can quietly eat away at even the strongest relationships, how human hearts crave acknowledgement, intimacy, and connection, and how easily these needs can be neglected until they manifest in secret pain. By the end of the week, both aunts had begun taking steps toward change. Linda had scheduled counseling sessions, had spoken in part to her husband about her feelings, and was cautiously optimistic about repairing the emotional distance that had grown between them. Susan had begun journaling, reflecting on her emotions, and had started attending therapy to understand her own needs, to find a way to navigate her connection with the other person, and to rebuild strength for the choices she had to make. Daniel watched these small steps with quiet pride and relief, knowing that his support, listening, and empathy had made a difference. Daniel also reflected on his own emotions, realizing that being thrust into the middle of two women's confessions had changed him. He had been forced to confront moral ambiguity, human fragility, and the complexity of love. He understood that life rarely offers perfect solutions, that supporting others often means holding space for difficult emotions without judgment, and that empathy can sometimes be more powerful than action. He felt a deeper connection to his family, not because the secrets were revealed, but because the trust and vulnerability had created new bonds. He thought about the future, about the challenges that lay ahead for Linda, Susan, and himself, and he realized that nothing would ever be the same. The family dynamic had shifted, the hidden truths had surfaced, and everyone would have to navigate this new reality. But Daniel felt ready, knowing that honesty, empathy, and presence could guide them through the storm. He had witnessed two women confront their own hearts, and in doing so, he had learned about courage, vulnerability, and the power of simply listening. One evening, as the sun set behind the river, Daniel sat quietly, reflecting on everything that had happened. He thought about the confessions, the tears, the fragile smiles, and the long conversations that had filled days with emotion. He realized that human hearts are fragile, complex, and often misunderstood, that love and connection are not simple, and that sometimes the bravest act is to face the truth, even when it hurts. He knew that both aunts were beginning to face their own truths, taking tentative steps toward healing, and he felt a quiet hope, a belief that despite the pain and confusion, they would find a way forward. As night fell, Daniel closed his eyes, thinking of Linda and Susan, their stories intertwined with his own life now. He knew there would be more difficult conversations, more moments of uncertainty, more emotions to navigate, but he felt ready. He understood the importance of presence, empathy, and honesty, and he knew that by being there for both aunts, he had not only helped them, but had grown in ways he had never imagined. He had seen human hearts laid bare, and he had learned that love, even in its imperfections, was worth supporting. Daniel woke to a quiet house, the kind of silence that felt heavy yet reflective. He could still feel the weight of the past days pressing on him, the confessions of both Linda and Susan replaying in his mind. He knew that the hard part was not just listening, but helping them navigate the next steps. He needed to be patient, compassionate, and steady, knowing that their emotional journeys were only beginning. He sipped his coffee slowly, thinking about how fragile hearts could be, how love could falter in silence, and how courage often comes wrapped in fear. He decided to start the day by checking in with Linda, arranging to meet her at a quiet bookstore cafe that she loved. She greeted him with a small smile, softer than usual, her eyes tired but more determined than before. Daniel sensed that she had spent the past day reflecting, Perhaps making small steps toward facing her emotions head-on, he sat across from her, letting the silence hang for a moment, allowing her to collect her thoughts before speaking. She took a deep breath and began. Linda spoke about the conversations she had with her husband, the way she had approached them carefully, honestly, and with humility. She admitted it hadn't been easy, her voice quivering at times. She had been met with confusion, anger, but also surprise and relief. Her husband hadn't expected honesty. He had been distant for so long, but he had responded with curiosity, not judgment, and that small window of understanding gave Linda hope. She described the difficulty of reconciling her guilt with the possibility of repairing the bond, the emotional push and pull that left her feeling both exhausted and alive. Daniel listened, nodding, reminding her gently that healing was a process, not a single conversation. She explained that she had started therapy sessions that helped her untangle her emotions, confront the loneliness she had felt for so long, and learn to communicate with her husband in ways she never had before. Linda's eyes shone with cautious optimism. She said that for the first time in years, she felt like she had a path forward, a way to rebuild, not perfectly, but honestly. Daniel felt a wave of relief, knowing that she was taking active steps, that she was facing her own heart. Instead of hiding from it, he encouraged her to continue, to embrace the discomfort as a part of growth, and to remain patient with herself and her husband. Later that afternoon, Daniel met Susan at a small riverfront cafe, the sun casting long shadows, the golden light reflecting off the water. Susan arrived with a tentative smile, her posture more relaxed than the first meeting. Daniel could see that she had been thinking deeply about their last conversation. She spoke immediately, telling him that she had begun journaling her thoughts and emotions, writing down everything she felt without fear of judgment. She admitted that it had been eye-opening, seeing her feelings on paper, understanding patterns she had ignored for years, and realizing that some of her pain stemmed from neglecting herself as much as neglect from her partner. Susan said that she had started small conversations with her husband, sharing feelings she had long buried, testing the waters for honesty, and though it was uncomfortable, she felt a sense of liberation in speaking her truth. She also admitted that she had reached out to the person who had made her feel seen, not to continue anything inappropriate, but to understand her own emotions, to ensure she was not simply escaping loneliness. Daniel listened carefully, reinforcing that understanding one's heart is the first step toward making healthy choices. He reminded her that self-awareness is a powerful tool, and that clarity often comes through difficult conversations and reflection. Over the following days, Daniel became a quiet anchor for both aunts, guiding them without imposing, offering support without judgment. He encouraged them to seek counseling, confront truths with their partners, and prioritize emotional honesty over avoidance. He watched as Linda and Susan began to take small steps toward healing. Linda grew more confident in expressing herself to her husband, and Susan began setting boundaries with the person who had captured her attention, learning to differentiate between emotional need and ethical choice. Daniel marveled at the resilience they showed, realizing that vulnerability often takes more courage than action. He also reflected on his own role, understanding that being a support system was not about fixing, but about presence. He could not repair their marriages, he could not undo years of neglect or emotional distance, but he could help them face their hearts. He could be the witness to their courage, the steady presence that allowed them to explore their emotions safely. He realized that sometimes love and family are about holding space for one another, about listening, guiding, and gently reminding each other that no one is alone. even in moments of fear and shame. One evening, Daniel visited Linda at her home. She had prepared dinner, a quiet effort to reclaim normalcy in her life. They spoke casually, but Daniel could sense the subtle shift in her demeanor. She was lighter, more present, not because everything was perfect, but because she had begun to act with integrity, to face her emotions with honesty. She thanked Daniel for being the one person she could trust without fear, and Daniel felt a warmth in his chest, knowing that his empathy had helped her take the first steps toward reclaiming her life. The following day, Daniel met Susan at a nearby park, the weather clear, a light breeze moving the leaves. Susan spoke about her therapy sessions, her growing self-awareness, and the steps she had taken to communicate honestly with her husband. She said that while the journey was difficult, she felt stronger, more capable of facing her emotions, and more prepared to navigate the complexity of her connections. Daniel encouraged her to continue, emphasizing patience, reflection, and ethical honesty. Susan nodded, smiling softly, and Daniel felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that she was beginning to find clarity and strength on her own. As the weeks passed, Daniel observed subtle changes in family gatherings. Conversations with Linda and Susan carried more honesty, fewer shadows. The air felt lighter, not because all problems were resolved, but because truth had replaced secrecy. The smiles at dinner were more genuine, the laughter easier, and Daniel understood that healing does not mean perfection, but the courage to face reality, to rebuild connections, and to act with integrity. He saw both aunts beginning to thrive emotionally, taking ownership of their feelings, and learning to navigate relationships with honesty and courage. Daniel also reflected on the lessons for himself, realizing that life often places us in situations that demand empathy, patience, and moral clarity. He understood that human emotions are rarely simple, that love and loyalty can be tested in unexpected ways, and that being present for others often requires listening without judgment. He felt gratitude for the trust both aunts had placed in him, and for the opportunity to witness their growth. He recognized that sometimes the bravest acts are not dramatic gestures, but quiet support, gentle guidance, and unwavering presence. One evening, Daniel found himself walking by the river, reflecting on the past month. He thought about the confessions, the tears, the quiet moments of vulnerability, and the steps toward healing he had witnessed. He realized that human hearts are delicate, but resilient, capable of growth even after mistakes, capable of finding clarity and courage when given understanding and support. He understood that love, family, and relationships are complex, but honesty and empathy can illuminate the path forward. As he walked, Daniel thought about Linda and Susan, both navigating their own journeys, both learning to face their hearts, and both beginning to rebuild the emotional bridges that had been weakened over time. He felt a quiet hope, knowing that the process was ongoing, that challenges would remain, but that with courage and integrity, they could continue moving forward. He also understood that his role as a supportive presence had not only helped them, but had deepened his understanding of empathy, human fragility, and the transformative power of listening. Daniel returned home that night feeling a sense of closure mixed with anticipation for the future. He knew that life would continue to challenge them, that mistakes and misunderstandings would arise, but he also knew that by fostering honesty, empathy, and self-awareness, both Linda and Susan had begun building stronger emotional foundations. He felt gratitude for the trust they had placed in him, and for the opportunity to witness their courage and resilience. He reflected that sometimes the most profound transformations come not from dramatic events, but from quiet, steady guidance and unwavering presence. In the final days of that month, Daniel visited both aunts individually. Noticing their progress, Linda had begun to find joy in small things again. Conversations with her husband were more open, and she had started embracing life with renewed energy. Susan had begun focusing on her own growth, balancing her needs with ethical responsibility, and engaging in honest dialogue with her spouse. Daniel marveled at their resilience, understanding that healing is a process, filled with courage, reflection, and the willingness to face one's heart without fear. He realized that through these experiences, he had also grown, understanding empathy in a deeper, more practical sense. He had witnessed human fragility, the complexity of love, and the power of simply being present. He understood that supporting someone does not mean taking responsibility for their choices, but guiding them toward clarity, accountability, and emotional honesty. He had learned that trust and vulnerability, when met with understanding and care, can catalyze profound change. As the story of these past weeks settled in his mind, Daniel felt a quiet sense of hope, knowing that both Linda and Susan were taking steps toward emotional healing, facing the truths of their hearts, and learning to navigate love, loyalty, and self-awareness with courage. He knew that challenges would arise again, but that honesty, empathy, and steadfast presence could guide them through, and he felt proud, not for intervening, but for witnessing, supporting, and helping them embrace the complexity and beauty of human emotion. Daniel ended the month sitting by his apartment window, looking at the river in the distance, reflecting on everything that had happened. He thought about the confessions, the trust, the emotional storms he had helped navigate, and he understood that love, family, and human connection are rarely simple, that they are messy, challenging, but deeply rewarding. And he felt a quiet certainty that even in the face of imperfection, honesty and empathy can guide hearts toward healing, resolution, and a more genuine connection with those we love.